layers of information that are controlling the show.
Okay, so you say there's this. The DNA is actually an information system.
Yes.
How does that compare to the information systems that we have in computers?
Well, that's where I think this story gets very interesting. I have a software engineer friend. He was doing some work for us. He retired early from Microsoft. Means he was about 38 or 40. I don't know, young guy. Brilliant architect-level programmer at Microsoft. He's writing code for us to, working with our molecular biologists to write a simulation of how genetic information is expressed to build proteins. So we're having an artificial-based, computer-based simulation of what's called the gene expression system. He walks into my office one day, throws a book down on the table. It's called Design Patterns, standard textbook for computer design engineers. And he says, I get the eerie feeling when I'm looking at what's going on in the cell that somebody's figured this out before us. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, it's the design patterns. I mean, and then he points to the book. He says, we have a design pattern is a term of art for a design strategy or a design logic. And he says, we've got design logic for processing information, for doing error correction, for doing distributed data retrieval and reassembly, and for hierarchical organization. We've got files within folders like on your desktop, in the hierarchical filing system. He says all those design patterns are at work inside the cell, except they're using a design logic that's like an 8.0, 9.0, 10.0 version of ours. It's the same basic logic, but it's more elegantly executed. And he says it gives me an eerie feeling.
And that logic is embedded in the DNA of the simplest living creature.
In the DNA and the overall architecture of the information processing
As the earliest creature that's ever been found historically, that same logic would be embedded in the DNA.
And there's some differences from what are called eukaryotic cells, which are cells with nuclei, and the simpler prokaryotes. But it's very sophisticated hierarchical arrangements of informational modules.
No, intelligent design proponents, as they like to call themselves, we just call them creationists, all of them. They like to say a lot that the probability of something happening is so astronomical as to be zero. But that just means that they have zero grasp on statistics. Because just because the probability of something being close to zero happening doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. Especially when you're talking about the formation of the very first reproducing cell in the prebiotic oceans on Earth. What's the probability of those few lipids coming together in just the right arrangement? Well, even if it's extremely low, that's just the probability if you took just those components in an isolated environment and let them hang out. We're talking the size of the entire Earth and these interactions happening throughout the ocean. So even if the probability is minuscule, the sheer number of interactions that are happening in a volume of water the size of the Earth means that the most rare of events will happen almost very often.
And
the rare becomes common.
The long amount of time given.
Long time, vast oceans, something that happens once every 10 trillion interactions is going to happen relatively often in something that big.
Right. A 1 in a billion chance happens 7,000 times a day, right? I mean, if you have something one in a million a day with 7 billion people, for example,
it's going to happen.
It happens a lot. Not just occasionally, just not to people you know. So.
My question's for Dr. Dembski. As I'm sure you're aware, the Dover, Pennsylvania School Board recently voted in favor of teaching intelligent design in public school science classrooms. And the Pro-Intelligent Design Discovery Institute, with which I understand you are affiliated, issued a press release asking them not to do that.
Right.
Do you feel that intelligent design is ready to be taught in public schools? If so, what do you propose we teach specifically? And if not, what do you think is still needed?
I mean, that's a whole can of worms. I mean, there's an intelligent design supplemental textbook that I've just helped write. I mean, basically it's a massive revision of the book of Pandas and People, which was the second edition. Now it's being retitled The Design of Life. I think soon we will be in a position to have that out, and I think it will deserve to be taught in the public school science classroom. I think right now it is worthy of discussion in science classes. I mean, what in particular? Well, I think question of origin of life. I mean, these ideas of specified complexity apply there. The irreducible complexity arguments, I think they're worthy of discussion. So I think there is material that could be brought in. We are not pushing it because I think we do want to see, for one thing, we don't want to force these issues. I think my colleagues and I were convinced that these equal time laws, it straitjackets teachers, it forces them to do things in many cases that they don't want to do, and we'd rather just have these ideas carry the day on their own. So that's where we are. It seems just, when I've looked at that law, I mean, it just seems very ill-conceived. I mean, even the origin of life is not supposed to be taught, I understand. So it's, is it ready for prime time? I think, when I'm asked this, often I say, I think evolutionary theory is in such sad shape that any competitor deserves to be present there. I mean, you got to understand. I mean, I was involved, for instance, in some Texas textbook hearings. There's a consensus trance in the textbooks. It's as though neo-Darwinism, that's it. There's no indication that there's any discussion, that there is any debate about the mechanisms of evolution in the science textbooks at the high school and the college level. And if you go, I mean, Simon Conway Morris, well-known paleontologist, writes in Cell in 2000, everybody's convinced that evolution has happened, but how it happened, there's no consensus there whatsoever. I mean, he'll admit that. And there's self-organizational approaches, there are now intelligent design approaches, there are lots of approaches, lots of mechanisms approach. Lynn Margulis, when she writes about neo-Darwinism, I mean, it's in scandalous tones. I mean, she'll say, it's like a sugary snack which sates curiosity but doesn't do anything to explain these systems. Now, her big thing is symbiogenesis. Is that taught in the textbooks? Probably just slightly mentioned. So it's, I think it's worthy of mention. I think there are ideas that are worth developing. There are now some interesting research articles written by design theorists arguing for intelligent design. I mean, this is peer-reviewed literature, mainstream literature. Should those be barred from the science classroom? Let me turn the question around. Just in terms of the distinction between creationism and intelligent design, creationism is always a doctrine of where everything comes from. So it's the source of being of the world. Intelligent design is looking for signs of intelligence in the world. And just what is the source of those signs of intelligence? It could be an embodied designer. It could be an unembodied designer. And the question is really, where does the evidence lead? I mean, why does somebody of Antony Flou's caliber, who's a well-known atheist who converted to a weak form of theism, but a form of theism nonetheless, why did he do that? And he said, because of these intelligent design arguments at the origin of life. So that's what convinced him. Now, I think just to hammer that home, though, about the distinction between creationism and intelligent design, there's no way, I mean, what intelligent design is looking at finite arrangements of matter and finding patterns there which point to intelligence. You look at a Rosetta Stone, there's intelligence that has left its mark there. Has intelligence left its mark in biological systems? But there's no way, by looking at finite arrangements of matter, to infer to an infinite, personal, transcendent creator God of the Christian, Muslim, or Judaic faith. I mean, you're just not going to get there. There's no logical train that gets you there. Thomas Aquinas noted that. Immanuel Kant noted it. So it's theologically and philosophically, it's actually a very modest program. It's not doing natural theology. I mean, if you recall William Paley's Natural Theology, the title of that book was, or subtitle of it was, Evidences for the Existence and Attributes of the Deity Collected from the Appearances of Nature. I mean, I love these old titles because they tell you the whole program right there. Evidence is for the existence of God, so we're going to prove the existence of God and the attributes of God. What are the attributes of God? The goodness, omnipotence, all these attributes of God collected from the appearances of nature. So you're going to look at nature, look at things in nature, and get to the God of Christianity. Well, there's no way to do that. So intelligent design that's not its program. And that's why also intelligent design is finding a lot of supporters outside the Christian and evangelical fold. I mean, I was invited to Oxford University in 2003 by the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, and I spoke on intelligent design, and my message was warmly embraced. Why? Because they hold to some sort of purposiveness or intelligence behind the world. Matter is not all there is. Okay? There is something that's working itself out in the material world. And this intelligence, they're totally up for that, but it's not a creator God that they're talking about. It's a very different sort of philosophical and metaphysical worldview.